Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples Integrated Recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes or bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. I wanted to talk about one of my favorite Stoics a little bit, Epictetus. He wasn't a philosopher who spoke from comfort. His worldview was forged in conditions that would have broken most people, myself included. He spent his early life as a slave, absolutely no control over his body or future. His master was cruel and injured him, left him with a lifelong limp and chronic pain. He lived with ongoing physical suffering, with very limited support or accommodations. He faced poverty, instability, exile, and rebuilding his life more than once. He endured all of this with no promise of justice or meaning, no reassurance that his pain would ever be recognized or repaired, and rather than being a victim, this man then taught discipline, agency, and inner freedom. Someone who knew suffering firsthand and refused to be a victim of it. And his authority comes from survival, not theory, proof that even when the world strips away everything, it cannot take the part of you that chooses how you're going to respond. And so, whatever you're facing in your life today, he would probably look you in the eye and ask one simple question: are you fighting reality or are you working with it? Stoics call this living in accordance with nature. Recovery circles might call this step 3. Therapists practicing DBT might call it radical acceptance. Nietzsche would call it amor fati, loving one's fate. Different languages, all the exact same thing. Stop wrestling with what isn't yours, reclaim what is. And Epictetus believed in God. If you don't, it still works. If you do, it still works. He wasn't interested in metaphysics. He was interested in reality, in suffering, agency, and in the human tendency to argue the moment that is in front of us instead of meeting it. So today I'm going to unpack how do you stop fighting what has happened and reclaim the part that is truly yours. How do you rebuild a life that doesn't collapse every time that circumstances don't behave the way that you want them to? Epictetus starts with a line that's so simple that it's almost obvious, but it's the foundation of everything. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Our opinions, desires, choices, actions, and responses, those are ours. Other people's behavior, weather, economy, who the president of the U.S. is, past, genetics, who stays or leaves in your relationships, how other people interpret you, not yours. When you are trying to control the wrong category, suffering is guaranteed. And when you can focus on what's yours, life becomes workable again. Epictetus taught, life is like a play. You don't get to choose the script. You don't cast the actors. You don't rewrite the scenes. Your job is to play the role that has been assigned to you with dignity and clarity, not to fight the role, not to rewrite the universe, and not to redirect the entire production. Now, fast forward to the 1930s, Bill Wilson paraphrased, or plagiarized maybe, all of this verbatim as the actor trying to run the show. Same idea, different century. And this is where I want to pause, because we're going to work from the clean philosophical version, the Stoicism version, which is accept your role, act well within it, and then let the rest go. Yeah, my own reaction is just kicking in here so I've got a few stories I want to share on this, and times that recovery peers have kind of mucked up the way that the original was written, and then slapped a spiritual band-aid on things that maybe needed a little bit more reflection. The original philosophy is great, but sometimes it gets applied in ways that are not healthy. For a while, I was working for a boss that was arguably exploiting me, was profiting well off of six figures while cramming my schedule. And one day, when I had, 8 or so people, I put a break on the schedule. And he didn't negotiate or ask me any questions. He just sent me an email as he was leaving. No conversation. I didn't authorize the break on your schedule, and took it off. That's not a misunderstanding. To me, I interpreted that as exploitation. Maybe it's arguable. I don't think so. But anyway, I talked about this with a peer in recovery about how drained I felt, how this didn't sit right with me, and how the energy was just raw. And the reply back was, acceptance is the answer, and why can't you just be content with what you have? He focused on, you just bought a Mustang. Can't you be happy about the fact that you have a new car? And it didn't land very well, as if gratitude cancels out being taken advantage of by somebody else, like a car should override the reality of boundaries being steamrolled. This resentment that I felt, that frustration, that's not a character defect, it's information. It was my system saying, you're being used, this is not sustainable, and something needs to change. And acceptance in that situation wasn't about being okay with what was happening. It was about accepting the truth that this boss, this situation is not going to change. And if I care about my sanity and health, then I need to change. Here's another example. In my early recovery, I did a flooring job on my house, and the contractor that I used was somebody that I was introduced to through peer-led recovery. So this is supposed to be a person of honesty and integrity. He's very well known in recovery circles. And ultimately, this guy ended up swindling $5,000 from me. I didn't go nuclear. I didn't smear him at meetings. I didn't blast him. I didn't write a review. I didn't start a whisper campaign. I controlled the part that was mine, which was my response. And when I processed this or bounced it off of people, one friend who I met through peer-led recovery, he was in a different state, didn't even know this person, should have been a completely neutral third party to discuss this with, who just kind of slapped maybe it's God's will, or don't you see how your non-acceptance of this is the problem here, or that your resentment is the problem? And look, being stolen from is wrong, and feeling hurt and angry about that is totally normal. Anger is not proof that I'm spiritually sick. It's a sign that a major boundary has been violated. So I did what Epictetus would suggest: control what is mine. I didn't let revenge drive the car. I didn't try to control other people's choices, but I also am not ever going to gaslight myself into believing that my emotional response was the problem. sometimes I try to soften the blow in my head a little bit by saying, hey, maybe he needed the money more than I did, that he's got a sick kid or something like that. I don't know. But another part of me sees that this guy has several YouTube and Instagram channels. He's always creating content in luxury houses and all this polished content. And I know that that's not true. And so both of those parts can live in me. Both inform how I relate to this memory. And so my acceptance didn't come from deciding that God wanted me to forfeit $5,000. It came from me deciding that I wasn't going to let that guy change who I am, that I wasn't going to match his character, that he's the face of peer-led recovery. Look at me, what a great peer in recovery I am. It's okay for me to feel the sting and then to choose a response that lines up with my values and the man that I want to be. So this is where I think that recovery literature can wobble a little bit. I'm going to quote something from a peer-led program that says, "It is a spiritual axiom. Anytime that we are disturbed, there's something wrong with us." What about justifiable anger? If someone cheats us, aren't we entitled to be mad? For us, in this program, these are dangerous exceptions. We have found that justified anger ought to be left to those better qualified to handle it. Now, I get what they're going for, because anger can be dangerous, especially for somebody in early recovery who doesn't know how to ride out a feeling without acting on it. Anger plus impulsivity plus a nervous system that is used to numbing, that's risky. Right on. But taken literally, this line turns into, if you're upset, something is wrong with you. If someone hurts you and you're sore about it, then you're in the wrong too. And I'm sorry, but that is BS. If you feel justified anger, being told that you're playing with fire and you shouldn't be trusted with an internal signal that's telling you that something is wrong, that's not how a nervous system works. That's not how trauma works. And honestly, that is not what Epictetus was saying. Anger is not a spiritual defect. It's an emotion. It's a signal. It tells you something mattered. A boundary got crossed. A value has been violated. And that doesn't mean that you have to act out. You also don't have to pathologize it. The work is learning how to feel anger without handing it the keys and the wheel. This brings me to page 417, which many in recovery circles are very familiar with the words on this page. I've got a recovery coin that somebody gave me. It says, "Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. Nothing in God's world happens by mistake." I've heard it countless times, quoted, printed on coins, framed on walls, spiritual mic drop. And the way that that's interpreted is that anything that happens is God's will and that it is your job to accept it. And that if something painful happens and you're bothered by that, then your thinking is the problem. If you're disturbed by it, then you're out of alignment with God's will. And as you can imagine, for people who have spiritual injuries, that is not going to land well for a lot of people. Now, several years ago, I asked my first mentor in a 12-step program, so let me get this right. If I'm just at Walmart at night and I get attacked in the parking lot, I should just accept it because it was God's will? And to his credit, he said, "No, you have a brain to use." And this is the part that I think sometimes gets lost, is that acceptance does not mean throwing away your discernment. Meaning can come later, but it shouldn't be used to override reality in the moment. It doesn't mean that you should ever accept abuse, exploitation, or injustice as something that's spiritually good for you. It means that we can accept something that happened, and from there, we can decide what we're going to do next. Epictetus never said tolerate everything. He said, know what's within your control and what isn't, and then live accordingly. There's another lens here that comes out of some Buddhist psychology, and it plays well with all of this idea that suffering is universal. Not in a shaming, other people have it worse, there's starving kids in Africa, you shouldn't complain kind of way, because that just shuts people down. But more like, whatever you're feeling right now, anger, grief, panic, shame, you're not the only person in the world who has ever felt that, and you're not uniquely broken, you're just a human being. When I sit with my own difficult emotions, it does help for me to stop and remind myself, this is part of being human. Everybody hits points where they feel overwhelmed, betrayed, stuck, or scared. And sometimes it's helpful for me to think about some of the things that my clients are carrying. People that are carrying heavy stuff that I wouldn't wish on anybody. Losing a husband to a major diagnosis, someone losing a wife, losing a kid in an accident. When I hold those stories in mind, it doesn't make my pain disappear. It's not about minimizing anything, but it does pull me out of a story that I'm uniquely targeted by the universe. And then that shift can also open up compassion for them and for me, becoming less about why is this happening to me and more about this is something that humans go through and how do I want to walk through it. From a practice standpoint, it can sound like, okay, I'm angry, I'm scared, I'm hurt, and I don't need to fix this feeling right now. I don't need to pray it away. I don't need to decide if it's justified. I need to just be willing to just be with it, the same way that I would sit with somebody else who is going through something hard. The point isn't to change your emotions, it's to stop fighting the fact that they're there. Once you're not resisting them or judging them, they can lose some of their charge. Yeah, they still hurt, but they're less fused to your identity. And then they can move, they can pass. The big ones, not immediately, of course, but eventually they do, or at least they soften. That is a very different kind of acceptance than you shouldn't feel this way, or something is spiritually wrong with you for being upset, or telling somebody to get over it. This is also what I do in a room with clients, is I don't carry their pain for them. Nobody can. But I have sat with enough people to confidently say that at least half of them are carrying wounds that most people could not ever imagine from the outside. And I don't tell anybody to pray it away. I don't tell them that their anger means something that is wrong with them. I don't tell them to go find their part in somebody else's cruelty. That is insane. But what I do offer is witnessing and presence and compassion. I'm not there to fix them. I'm there to be there with them while they're in it. Most people don't need an answer in those moments. They need somebody who isn't scared of emotions, somebody who can sit in discomfort without trying to either control it or shut it down or tell them to pray it away. And that is what healthy internal leadership looks like, that you don't have to exile anger, grief, or resentment, but you can be willing to sit with those parts and say, I see you, and I get why you're here, and I'm not going to abandon myself while feeling this. That is acceptance. Not being passive, but staying with yourself instead of leaving. But I want to shift to something else, because more times than I can count in my life, I have assigned a judgment of good or bad that ended up being something totally different down the road. And I'm sharing this because it shows how acceptance can look like collapse before it becomes clarity. In 2019, I was publicly humiliated, a dozen newspaper articles, libel, slander. The exact phrasing was that I sexually trafficked a person with mental illness. And a part of me that is still healing from all of that knows that that kind of language is how you get a lot of zeros in a paycheck. And another part of me is still hurt because it came from a family that I was close with for like a decade. In the aftermath, I was demoted. I spent weeks being punished with the intent of trying to push me out the door. All of this was 60 days sober. Just to really abbreviate this, I did end up getting fired, and then I couldn't find a job anywhere. Couldn't get a job washing windows, scraping barnacles off of boats. I was broken to a point of total willingness. Not resignation, but surrender, where I stopped fighting what was and focused on what I could do next. And once I stopped getting in my own way, everything actually moved very quickly, almost too quickly. You can call that divine intervention, manifesting, or applying Epictetus. But the truth is that without that breaking point, I don't know that I would have ever been able to have built the life that followed. Another example, I lived for a decade next to the worst Karen neighbor you could imagine. She policed my roof, my bushes, my yard. She recorded interactions with me. One time she brought her 300-pound deputy sheriff husband over as muscle and intimidation. And instead of allowing my protective parts to drive, I kept an interaction very short and professional. And then I said to my partner, "That's it. We are going to Walmart and getting boxes." And I sold the house, I moved, and today I live on 2.5 acres of privacy and freedom, the HOA free zone, more plants than any addict could count. I fire guns in the backyard. If I want to pee outside, I do. I love it. Anyway, none of that came from approval. It came from alignment. And so I'm going to move into a concept where Stoicism pushes beyond simple acceptance. The concept amor fati, loving your fate, doesn't mean that everything that happens is good. It means that everything can be used. Pain can become raw material. Injustice can become clarity. Loss can become direction. And humiliation can become a breaking open point that forces you to find a new path. It's not that God wanted you to suffer, it's you faced what you faced, and now what are you going to build from it? And that is agency without ego, acceptance without collapse, and responsibility without self-blame. Here's how you're going to practice radical acceptance without losing yourself. Name what you can control and what you can't. Then drop the secondary emotion and instead align with reality instead of arguing with it, and use adversity as material instead of meaning. Epictetus did not teach helplessness, he taught clarity. Step 3 in a 12-step program is not about being passive for everything that happens. It's about being grounded. And in IFS, it's not about indulging in emotions and letting them drive. It's about you leading them. Amor fati doesn't mean loving pain. It means loving who you can become when you stop fighting reality and instead start shaping your response. You don't control the script, but you do control your performance. And sometimes, looking back, the moments that you might have hated the most were quietly building the life that you were meant to live, not because the universe ordained every detail, but because you refused to abandon yourself while you were walking through them. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we are all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. And in the meantime, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.